with some of the Savage XL 5.9 GTXL-6 failures that have been happening on its 3-speed transmission. I will also explain some design issues that I've seen that may need some attention from HPI. So what I'll do, I'll first talk about the screws, the issues with the strip screws. I will start off by using the exploded view of the manual online here to start the discussion, right? So let's go down to the exploded view, right? So regarding the strip screws, so first I want to thank HPI for giving us hex hardware as opposed to the old Phillips or Starhead drives. But not only did they give us the hex head bolts, but we also got machined threads, so machine screw threads, right? Maybe 0.5 pitch, as opposed to the older screws. Those were coarser threads, right? So they'll bite into the nylon differently than the machine threads. It seemed like the machine threads having more contact surface area in the hard nylon requires more torque to undo them or to get them tight. And what that results in, we have more stress on the head of the bolts, which may be a reason for the stripping out, right? So maybe that needs some revision. Do you go back to regular core threads with the hex head hardware still, or do you tweak the design somewhat so that the load on these bolts aren't that high to cause them to strip out? Now, stripping is occurring so far in 2 locations, reported locations. One, fellow Savage owner has these top transmission bolt stripped, so it will have a hard time getting these out because they're deep down into or below flush of the plastic head. So for him to get those out will be a little bit challenging. Now, my issue I had was the transmission or the bulkhead screws. These 494-556 screws. Mine stripped out, and these are going into plastic, and they're stripped out. So you would expect them to be stripping out and going into aluminum or metal. Right now, I was able to get my Dremel wheel in there and make notches on these to undo them. But as I said before earlier, there may be cases where the Dremel cannot get into tight locations to work on these, or your easy out cannot get into those locations. So these strip bolts may warrant you to do more modifications or cuts to the part where it's stuck into to get them out. So that's one issue I found, right? Now let's go back to the transmission. So on the transmission gear assembly, I found 2 issues. The first one was significant play back and forth on the top spur shaft here, back and forth. What I did was I put a shim between this bearing and this clip on the shaft when it protrudes the back of this spacer. And then that made the shaft not shuddering back and forth, right? The other issue I had on mine was that my 3rd gear clutch wasn't shifting, and I could not get the set screw, which is in this first pocket here in this projection, to turn. And I had to remove the transmission to make sure not to strip it out by trying to torque it in the transmission case or housing. So I removed it, and I used brand new hex tools because, again, I didn't want to strip that out to remove it. Now, this is the adjustment screw for the shift point, so it should not be hard to remove. When I removed it, and you'll see this in the video coming up, that it had thread lock on there. We don't want thread lock on this first or lower set screw, because we have to go in there and adjust that from time to time. So we don't want that to have thread lock. We want thread lock on these two, and we want blue thread lock. Now I found that HPI uses a brown. Maybe when it cures it turns brown, not blue like the older versions. And I find that brown thread lock seems to be for high temperature, because it's really hard to get the set screws out with that brown thread lock. If you could go back to blue, that would be awesome. Okay. Other issue I found was on these bearings. Now these bearings say B025, and when I look for B025, they are metal shield bearings. But the one in my truck actually aren't metal shield, they're plastic shield. And I think one of them also had the ring knocked off. So I've replaced that with a metal shield bearing that came on the older version. So if HPI could look back at what they have in stock, the sizes are the same, but if you put B025 into the search window of HPI, you get the metal shield ones, but mine aren't metal shield. So you guys could check if yours are metal shield. On the center cluster assembly, mine was shaking really bad. The third gear hanging out there was shaking really bad, and I noticed it. So I removed mine from the truck and I compared it with my stock older XL. Again, we'll show in the video a comparison of how the gears were moving around, right? So I took it apart, noticed that this one had too much wobble, and I had to shim, put another shim, I think a 0.25 shim beside this existing shim. And I also put a shim under this center idle gear as well, because this one had a little bit of play. So in all total, I replaced one bearing and I added one shim to the top assembly and two shim to the lower assembly, and the video will show where I added those. Now let's talk about this grease thing. Now, yes, the previous version XL Nitro did not have grease in the transmission. This one has quite a bit of grease, but again, grease won't hurt the gears or the parts. In fact, the grease won't stick on the teeth. If you open up your transmission, I opened mine a couple times, and the gear is all slung out to the walls. So you could remove it. You don't need to have so much grease in there. I'm talking to the guys here, but I've seen some commentary that the grease could be what's causing the problem. Now, what's the problem? The problem is the failure of, I think it's around 4 cases now, of the 26 and 36T third gear assembly. And there's one guy also that had his second gear torn up as well from progressive damage. So it could be a couple things. One thought was the grub screw came out. I think one of the guys that had the second gear messed up. His was he said he had a grub screw he found in the bottom. We don't know if that caused the problem, but quite a bit of guys, I think the other 3 guys, including myself, had the grub screw, I think, is in place, and I think the wobble is what's probably causing the issue to cause the third gear to fail, because this is going back and forth here significantly, the top cluster, and the lower cluster is wobbling. You could call it's bending it kind of, because it's off center, right? And the video will show that. I did not find an issue with the lower cluster here. Okay, so my video will show what I've done, and I've illustrated before and after. The fix, I show what shim I use. I measured them, right? I did not take the engine out. Now let's go to the engine. I did not take my engine out. Now what I've noticed though is my clutch bell has more play back and forth than I would care to have. So I will go back and check that out, right? Um, Now my truck is now set up with I would call it the shim fixes. So I don't have any motion in the cluster. I don't have any motion in the top gear assembly. So I'm gonna go ahead and run my truck probably tomorrow or day after, and then I'll go back and address the the clutch bell that I think it's have more play than I would want. Okay, so what I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna end the video right here, and then I'm gonna jump to my other clips that I've taken to show you how I address the issue with the transmission rework. Now, before I do that, let's go back here and type in B025. That was the bearing that we saw, the flange bearing. So you see these are metal shield bearings, right? Now the one in my truck, it's not metal shield, it came with plastic shield, and one of the rings got knocked off, and I think it's the play back and forth that knocked one of the rings off. So that makes the play even worse because the gears don't have a positive stop anymore. So I think HPI should look into that as well. Now I've replaced that one bad bearing with one of my metal shield spears I had. Okay, so let's see how it works.